Dust rose across the dry horizon as three pickup trucks screeched to a stop outside a weathered farmhouse. 6 men jumped out, faces hard, rifles drawn. Their leader marched toward the porch where an old man sat in silence. "You're just a broken-down relic," the thug sneered. "Hand over your guns and bow." The old man didn't move, didn't blink. He simply looked up, calm, cold, calculating. The leader snatched the man's hat and threw it into the dirt. "You hear me?" Still no answer, but the old man stood slowly, steadily, his presence unsettling. The gang had come for money. Instead, they'd awakened something far more dangerous. And by the time they realized who he was, they were already too close to run. At the far end of a sun-bleached road in northern Arizona, where the dust hangs in the air like memory, sits a modest ranch house flanked by dry grass and stubborn cottonwoods. The paint is faded. The shutters creak when the wind shifts. But one thing never falters. The American flag out front, raised at dawn, lowered at dusk, crisp and proud. Never a day forgotten. That's Harold Finch's doing. He lives alone out there. 69, silver-haired, built like a man who's carried too many burdens too far without ever setting them down. Locals don't know much about him, and Harold prefers it that way. Doesn't talk much, doesn't visit town unless absolutely necessary. But when he does, it's never for himself. Everyone in Iron Creek remembers last winter when the Widow Martin's fence collapsed under heavy winds. Before sunrise the next morning, Harold was out there with a shovel hammer and a thermos of black coffee. He didn't ask, he didn't bill her, just nodded once and got to work. Or the time he buried Thomas Riley, an old Marine who died with no next of kin. The funeral home called the sheriff. Sheriff called Harold, no questions asked. Harold showed up in a pressed shirt and clean boots, dug the grave himself, stood alone through the entire service, saluted once and walked away. And there was the flood 3 years back. Heavy rain turned a dry gulch into a raging torrent. 2 boys were trapped on the far side. Everyone panicked, but Harold drove his truck into the water without a word. Waded chest deep through the current, 1 kid over each shoulder. By the time help arrived, Harold was already wrapping them in towels from his back seat. People say he's strange, too quiet, too private. Some say he's haunted. Maybe he is, but even the skeptics lower their voices when his name comes up. Because when things go wrong in Iron Creek, it's not the sirens they hope for. It's Harold Finch. There's something about Harold Finch's ranch that makes people speak in hushed tones. Not out of fear exactly, more like reverence. The place itself isn't much to look at. A weathered barn, a slanted porch in a stretch of land where the cattle graze slow and silent. But folks in Iron Creek say the wind sounds different out there. Like it carries secrets, like it remembers. Everyone's got a theory about Harold. Charlie Newton at the feed store swears Harold once trained combat dogs for the Marines. You ever see the way his mutt moves? He'll say, "That's not a house dog, that's precision." Old Mrs. Vladimir, who runs a church thrift shop, insists he's just a bookworm, reads those dusty old war novels cover to cover, probably thinks he's some kind of soldier. Teenagers make up ghost stories how Harold once snapped a man's arm clean because he raised a hand to his wife. Sheriff Wilson never confirmed it, but he also never denied it. Whatever the rumor, the town agrees on. One thing, Harold doesn't talk much, never raises his voice, doesn't argue. But when things go sideways when someone crosses a line, they say he reacts with eerie calm, efficient, immediate, no wasted movement, no warning. The kind of man who doesn't bluff. What no one knows, not the sheriff, not the pastor, not even Sarah Thompson next door who's known him 15 years, is that Harold Finch isn't just another reclusive veteran. He was Phantom 6, commander of a Navy SEAL team, so covert their missions were buried under 6 layers of classified ink. For 23 years, he led Black Ops operations across the globe, Somalia, Fallujah, Kandahar. He extracted hostages under heavy fire, neutralized high-value targets, and once vanished behind enemy lines for 2 weeks only to return, dragging a wounded pilot across the border. Then after one final mission in southern Afghanistan, one so bloody, so unforgiving, it left scars no one could see. He disappeared from the military map, retired early, changed his name, bought a ranch where no one would ask questions, and he's kept it that way ever since. But silence can only stretch so far. And sometimes the ghosts we bury come back looking for us. Or worse, they come looking for someone to finish what we started. South of the Arizona border, the rules are different. Loyalty is bought, silence is enforced, and lives are traded like currency. The man at the top is known as El Tiburon the Shark. Ruthless, calculating, and patient in a way that frightened even his own men. He didn't shout, he didn't threaten, he simply nodded, and things happened, usually involving blood. For the past year, his cartel had begun reaching northward, not with flashy attacks or shootouts. Those attracted too much heat. Instead, they picked off soft targets, isolated ranches, remote farmsteads, people with land supplies or rumors of hidden cow, people who couldn't call for help fast enough. Arizona's high desert became a silent battlefield. One of El Tiburon's youngest scouts, Nico, wasn't ruthless, just ambitious. He wanted to move up, wanted to prove he could spot opportunities others missed. So when he spotted an old Dodge pickup pulled over on a back road near Highway 191, he watched from a safe distance. An elderly white man, tall and quiet, was kneeling beside a sputtering sedan. The family beside it looked like migrants, worn clothes, scared eyes. The man inspected the engine, said a few words, then patched a hose with electrical tape pulled from his truck. To Nico, it looked suspicious. Why would a gringo help undocumented migrants out in the middle of nowhere? Unless he was moving something himself. Guns, cash, contraband. He snapped a photo of the license plate with his burner phone and sent it up the chain. When the message reached El Tiburon's table, the Shark didn't hesitate. The location matched previous rumors. A rancher up north, rumored to be ex-military off-grid, probably paranoid. Perfect for storing weapons or laundering money, a target worth investigating. El Fantasma Americano, one of the lieutenants joked. The ghost. El Tiburon didn't laugh. Send Mateo, he said flatly. Mateo was a retrieval specialist. Not subtle, not gentle, but efficient. He'd raided 5 properties that year, left no witnesses at 3 of them. The next morning, 3 trucks were loaded with 6 armed men. Their orders were simple. Find out what the old man is hiding, secure anything of value, and if he resists, leave nothing standing. What none of them knew was that they weren't heading toward a victim. They were driving straight into a legend's front yard. The ground trembled slightly before the sound caught up. 3 rust-eaten tin trucks came barreling down the dirt road engines, snarling dust clouds rising like smoke behind them. Harold Finch didn't move. He stood on his porch, a steaming mug of black coffee in his hand, eyes narrowed against the sun. He'd heard the tires before he saw them. 3 vehicles staggered, formation coming fast. Not locals, not lost. Trouble. The truck skidded to a stop in a loose semicircle, spraying gravel across his driveway. 6 men jumped out, young, armed, faces twisted into sneers, carved by arrogance. The one in front wore dark sunglasses and a bulletproof vest, too clean to be old. He moved like he was used to giving orders, and worse, used to being obeyed. Mateo, so this is the famous old rancher, he said with a smirk. Thought you'd be taller. Harold said nothing. He didn't need to. Mateo stepped onto the porch and spotted something glinting in a rusted dish on the table. Harold's Navy SEAL Challenge coin, worn edges, a symbol of everything earned through blood, fire, and silence. With 2 fingers, Mateo picked it up, rolled it in his palm like a toy, then flung it into the dirt at Harold's feet. He stepped on it. Doesn't mean much out here, does it? Harold met his eyes, still calm, still quiet. Not a flicker of rage, not even a frown. But Mateo's smirk faltered just for a breath. Search the house, he barked. The others moved fast, doors flung open, cabinets ripped from walls, a mattress sliced open like an animal. One of them kicked over Harold's bookshelf photographs, folded letters, and a Bible hit the floor. He's hiding something, one muttered. Check the barn, check the well. Tear it apart, Mateo snapped. He's got cash, weapons, something. Harold stood still as they destroyed his quiet life. But behind his eyes, something stirred. He took in everything. Weapon positions, footsteps, field of fire. How the youngest one kept his finger nervously near the trigger. He didn't interrupt. Not yet. Because Harold Finch wasn't just watching. He was waiting. And they didn't even realize they were already inside the kill box. In the back room of Harold's modest home, a pry bar groaned against a heavy chest bolted into the floor. One of the cartel men grunted, wiping sweat from his brow as the lid finally gave way with a sharp crack. Inside, there were no stacks of cash, no weapons cache, no drugs, just a neatly folded American flag, a stack of photographs, laminated field maps, and rows of medals, each one gleaming even in the dust-filtered sunlight. Silver Star, Bronze Star with Valor, Navy Cross, and tucked beneath them, a faded black and white photograph. A group of grim-faced SEALs kneeling in desert gear rifles, slung across their chests. One man in the center stood taller, eyes sharp, even in monochrome. Harold Finch. Lewis, the youngest of the crew, stared at the photo like it had caught fire in his hand. His voice cracked. "Boss, I think we messed up. This guy, he's not just some farmer." Mateo snatched the photo, glanced at it with disinterest, then scoffed. "Just a damn story. Probably fake." He tossed the photo to the floor, stepped over the medals, and motioned toward the door. "Drag him out. Let's finish this." Outside, the desert heat had climbed higher, warping the air above the driveway. The wind had quieted like it was watching. They forced Harold to his knees in the dirt just off the porch. His hands were bound, his flannel shirt soaked with sweat and grit. One of the men popped the cap off a rusted gas can and began sloshing its contents over the steps and railings. Another thug pulled a rag from his pocket, stuffed it into an empty bottle, and flicked his lighter. Harold watched the flame catch with the cold clarity of a sniper, adjusting for wind. "You burn this place. You'll regret it," he said softly. Mateo smirked. "Only thing I'll regret is wasting a morning on an old man's fairy tales." Then for just a second, Harold's eyes locked onto Louise, and Louise looked away. The wind returned hot and dry. The match was about to fall, but something had already snapped. Not a sound, not a move, just a shift in the air, like nature itself had taken a breath and held it. The crunch of tires on gravel broke the tension before the flame dropped. A blue pickup appeared from behind the sycamore as the engine rumbling low as it pulled up the long dirt driveway. Dust curled behind it, cutting through the desert heat like a warning shot. Jenny Lee, 58 years old, sun-tough and no nonsense. She ran the nursery supply store in town and had known Harold Finch longer than most 15 years of neighborly silence, tool sharing, and fence post swapping. She knew he didn't talk much, but she also knew he never asked for help, and he never looked helpless. Which is why the sight before her froze her blood. Harold on his knees, hands bound. Strange men standing around with guns. The porch soaked in gasoline, smoke from a Molotov rising in the air. Jenny's foot eased off the accelerator. One of the armed men took a step forward, hand hovering over a pistol. But before she could open her door, Harold spoke loud enough for her to hear, calm as ever. "Just business, Jen. Come back tomorrow." His voice was even measured, but Jenny caught the message beneath the words. "Run now." She forced a smile, the kind women wear when pretending not to notice the knife under the table. "I was just returning your post hole digger," she called, holding up the tool from her passenger seat. The cartel leader, Mateo, strolled toward her with that same oiled grin. "We're just having a conversation, Senora. Your friend here is stubborn." Jenny nodded slowly. "All right then," she said, putting the truck in reverse. "I'll see you tomorrow, Harold." She backed out with deliberate, calm eyes, locked on Harold's until the last second. But once she was clear of the property, her hands shook. She didn't drive home. She sped straight to the only gas station in a 20-minute radius where fate, or maybe something more, was already moving. Outside Pump 2 stood her nephew, Captain Owen Ree, freshly back from deployment and fueling up his Jeep in full National Guard uniform. Jenny didn't park. She screeched to a halt, jumped out, and grabbed his arm. "Owen," she said, breathless. Something's happening at Harold's place. And when she said his name, the captain's expression changed because Owen had seen war, and he knew the look of a man who was about to bring it home. The dust hadn't even settled from Jenny's tires when another engine roared over the ridge. This one low and fast. A sand-colored Jeep cut through the dirt road like a blade, headlights glaring against the dry wind. Captain Owen Ree was behind the wheel, his uniform crisp. Despite the urgency, the sidearm on his hip more than ceremonial. In the passenger seat sat Corporal Dean Carter, a local guardsman who didn't ask questions. He just followed orders. When Owen told him, "We may be walking into something bad," when the Jeep crested the hill and the farmhouse came into view, Owen's instincts kicked in. 6 men armed, one bound hostage, fuel canisters, porch half-drenched, a lit bottle flickering in one thug's hand. This wasn't just a robbery. It was about to be an execution, Hold Owen said, slamming the Jeep to a stop and throwing open the door. All eyes turned to him, even Mateo's. "This is private property," Mateo barked, stepping forward like he owned the ground beneath him. "Military has no business here." Owen didn't respond at first. His eyes had landed on the dirt near the porch. Scattered across the ground were medals, real ones. Service stars, unit insignias, a Navy cross gleaming in the sunlight, a forgotten crown. But it wasn't the medals that stopped him cold. It was the photo. A crumpled, dusty picture of a SEAL team in Fallujah, faces hard gear worn, and right in the center, a man younger but unmistakable, Harold Finch. Owen's heart thudded once loud and heavy. He stepped closer, voice low but firm. "Sir, are you Commander Harold Finch?" Phantom 6, Harold lifted his head. His face was calm, but his eyes, those ice-blue eyes, held history. Ghosts, silence. He gave the smallest nod. Owen stood straighter, then without hesitation, snapped to attention and delivered a textbook salute. "Sir, it's an honor. My father, Major Ree, spoke of you, said you pulled him from a collapsed tunnel in Kandahar, carried him 5 miles through enemy fire." The cartel men looked between them, confused. Mateo sneered. "He's just a farmer, some old man playing soldier." Owen didn't look at him. "This man," and he said firmly, "is a warfighter, a commander, and if you don't walk away right now, he won't be the one you'll need to worry about." Harold didn't speak. He didn't need to. His reputation had already arrived. The silence stretched, thick, electric, like the calm before the storm doesn't just pass, it waits. Captain Owen Ree knelt to pick up a photo tossed carelessly to the dirt. He held it up, dusted it off with the edge of his sleeve. The image showed Harold, decades younger, drenched in sweat, hauling a wounded pilot across rocky terrain as tracer fire streaked overhead. "Syria, Operation Ashfall." Owen said, a loud voice tight with awe. He carried Lieutenant Parrish for 2 miles with a collapsed lung and a shattered femur. They gave him the Silver Star, but never made the story public. Another photo fluttered beside the barn, caught on the wind. One of the younger cartel members, Luis, picked it up. His eyes widened. It showed Harold breaching a compound door rifle, up flanked by 2 masked SEALs. The patch on the hostage's uniform said Bogota, Colombia. Luis stepped back. "No, no, no, no. I've seen this guy before. He's the one they called Viento Fantasma Ghost Wind. My uncle used to tell stories. Said the Americans had a ghost that slipped through walls, left bodies but no footprints." Mateo snorted, trying to laugh. "Just stories to scare kids." But Luis shook his head. "No, they never knew his name. They only saw the results. He took down the Ortega Bridge cell in 3 nights alone. They never found the weapons cache because it burned after he cleared the hostages." Another thug, Raul, turned pale. "Wait, that's him." Someone's hand trembled, a gun lowered, then another. Harold still hadn't moved. Captain Ree stood beside him, arms crossed. "You should know something," he said to Mateo. "This man didn't get famous because he talked. He got famous because no one lived long enough to tell the story." Mateo's jaw clenched, but his posture faltered. The wind shifted. A hawk circled overhead. The silence returned, but this time it carried weight. The kind of silence that comes before consequences. Then it happened. One of the cartel men, Javier, stepped backward and let his rifle fall to the dirt with a hollow thud. "I'm not dying for this," he muttered. Another followed, and another. Harold finally exhaled. It wasn't a standoff anymore. It was a reckoning. Harold stood slowly. No theatrics, no threat in his voice. Just stillness, measured and sharp like a drawn blade. The way his boots settled into the dust, the slight bend of his knees, the subtle alignment of his shoulders. It wasn't just a man rising from the ground. It was a predator taking his stance. Mateo took half a step back before catching himself. His hand twitched near his pistol, but he didn't draw. The others had already lowered their weapons. 2 were retreating toward the trucks. One looked like he might vomit. Harold's voice, when it came, was low, unshakable. "You came here thinking I was prey, that I was soft, alone. Easy. His pale blue eyes swept across the group, each man frozen under the weight of something they didn't understand until now. You've got one chance, Harold continued. Walk away. Forget this place. Don't come back. Silence, then Harold took a single step forward. Just one. But that was all it took. In that one movement, how he planted his foot, how his hands stayed loose but ready. Everything changed. It was like watching a storm gather behind a calm sky. The kind of threat that doesn't shout. It waits. Luis took off first, sprinting for the far truck. Javier followed, grabbing his rifle off the ground with shaking hands. Only Mateo stood his ground, though his bravado was cracked, leaking through the seams of his forced grin. You think you can scare me, viejo? He barked. You're just a... But even his voice broke when Harold's gaze locked on his trembling hand. You've been holding your breath every 7 seconds, Harold said softly. Sign of cocaine use. Right hand twitching. You're already in withdrawal. You're not thinking clearly. Mateo's lips parted, but no words came out. You won't win this fight, Harold finished. Another beat of silence. Then clink. Mateo's gun hit the dirt. We're leaving, he muttered, backing away. There's nothing worth taking here anyway. One by one, the cartel men loaded into their trucks, engines fired, tires spun into desperation. Dust swallowed their retreat. Harold stood in the driveway, arms at his sides, eyes steady as the dust rolled past him like a curtain falling at the end of a play. The message was clear. You don't walk into a lion's den and expect mercy. The next morning, long before the sun hit its stride, a line of dusty trucks began winding down the road toward Harold Finch's ranch. It started with Sarah Thompson, the school teacher, holding a basket of fresh cornbread. Then came the Watson boy twins he once pulled from floodwaters, bringing nails and plywood. Jenny Lee arrived last, her truck bed piled with tools and fencing supplies. Within the hour, Harold's front porch was full. They didn't knock. They didn't ask. They simply started sweeping broken glass, straightening furniture, stacking firewood, hammering siding, not out of pity, out of respect. By midday, the sheriff's cruiser rolled up, followed by 3 more and a National Guard vehicle behind them. Sheriff Wilson stepped out, faced but resolute, flanked by a dozen deputies in tan uniforms. He tipped his hat as he approached. We came as soon as we heard, Harold, he said. I'm sorry we weren't here sooner. Harold didn't respond right away. He stood on his porch with a mug in his hand, the flag behind him, whipping in the morning wind. The lines on his face were deeper than yesterday, but his posture hadn't changed. It's handled, he said simply. The sheriff nodded. I figured as much. Then quietly more people began to arrive. Mr. Chen from the grocery store Harold never let close after the power went out. Evelyn Parks, whose disabled husband Harold fixed a wheelchair ramp for families from town. Farmers, kids, veterans in worn jackets and caps faded from time. No one spoke at first. They just stood in front of the porch, shoulder to shoulder. Then it started. One man stepped forward, Vietnam patch on his jacket, and saluted. Another followed, and another. Soon a dozen veterans, old and young, limping, scarred, stoic, stood in a line, each raising a salute to the man no one had truly known until now. He had never asked for thanks, never told a story. But stories have a way of escaping like wind under a door. Harold looked out at the people he'd lived beside for years, the ones he quietly served, protected, and never expected anything from in return. And in that moment, he said nothing. He just nodded once, his eyes sharp and proud. It was all he needed to say. The sun was sinking low, casting long golden shadows across Harold Finch's ranch. The chaos from the day before had faded, leaving only the quiet creak of wood, the occasional hammer strike, and the soft murmur of wind slipping through the cottonwoods. Most of the crowd had gone home, but one man remained. Captain Owen Reese stood beside Harold's, sleeves rolled up, sweat streaking the back of his neck as he tightened a hinge on the busted front gate. Sturdy as hell, Owen said, testing awe in the swing. Kind of like the guy who lives here. Harold gave a half smile and passed him a rusted screwdriver. They worked in silence for a while, 2 men who had both seen the weight of the world, one younger and still carrying it, the other older, hardened by it. You know, Owen finally said, wiping his hands on his fatigues, I used to think the only way to honor what we did was to talk about it. Let people know. Harold didn't look up. He was gently brushing dust off the old mailbox, now straightened and bolted back into the post. But after seeing you, Owen continued, I think I get it now. Harold paused, then turned. Sometimes, Owen said. Silence is the loudest testimony. The older man nodded, his face calm but unreadable. I didn't disappear because I was ashamed, Harold said after a moment. I disappeared because I'd already given enough. I fought so others could forget. That's the point. We carry the weight so they don't have to. Owen sat down on the porch steps, the board still splintered but sturdy. My dad used to tell me stories about you. He said you saved his life and never once spoke about it after. Harold lowered himself onto the opposite step, the sun catching the scar that ran along his jawline. I remember him, Harold said. Good man. Never forgot to laugh even when things were burning. For a while, they sat in that soft, quiet, just wind old wood in a fading orange sky. I'll keep your secret, Owen said finally, but I won't forget it. Harold nodded again, slower this time. Good, he said. Just don't make a statue. I hate pigeons. And for the first time in a long time, he smiled. In the quiet of that Arizona dusk, one truth stood taller than the flag on Harold Finch's porch. You don't need noise to leave a legacy. You just need courage. Harold never sought medals, attention, or applause. He fought so others wouldn't have to. He suffered in silence so the next generation could sleep peacefully. In a world where loud voices dominate, where people rush to post every thought in achievement online, Harold's life reminds us that dignity lives in quiet service and strength doesn't always roar. And maybe that's the question we should all ask ourselves today. Are we living in a way that helps others forget the fear and remember the good? Are we the type of neighbors who show up when no one else does? Let this story spark something in you. Whether you served or not, each of us has the chance to carry a piece of that quiet bravery. Maybe it's in helping a neighbor fix a fence. Maybe it's in listening without judgment. Or maybe it's just raising a flag every morning to remind the world we still stand for something. Tell us in the comments, what does honor mean to you today? Do you know someone like Harold Finch? Someone who never asked to be remembered, but deserves to be? We read every story you share. You might even inspire the next video. Thank you for watching and for honoring the values that matter. Respect, duty, and kindness. If this story moved you, please consider liking the video, subscribing to the channel, and sharing it with someone who still believes in quiet heroes. Because sometimes the strongest voices are the ones that never needed to speak at